Commander Daniel stood on the bridge of the warship Vigilance and looked at the stars through the main window. The view was beautiful, but he was not thinking about beauty. He was thinking about war. For 3 long years, humanity had been fighting the swarm. These were insect-like aliens who traveled from planet to planet and destroyed everything they found. They had already killed billions across the galaxy, and now they were coming for Earth. But humanity was not alone in this fight. The Confederacy had joined them as allies. There were tall aliens with blue skin and silver eyes. Their technology was far more advanced than anything humans had ever built. Their ships were faster, their weapons were stronger, and their shields could take hits that would destroy a human vessel in seconds. When they offered to help humanity fight it seemed like a gift from the heavens. Admiral Lisa Monroe had made the alliance happen. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had spent months talking to the leaders, learning their language, understanding their culture. In the end, she convinced them that humans should fight together. The promise to share their advanced technology after the war was won. They promised shield generators that could protect entire cities. They promised jump drive systems that could move ships across the galaxy in seconds. All humanity had to do was help them defeat the common enemy. Lieutenant Kate worked as the tactical officer aboard the Vigilance. She was young, only 28 years old, but she was very good at her job. Her screens showed the positions of every ship in the combined fleet. There were hundreds of vessels flying together in perfect formation. Human ships flew alongside warships. It was a sight that would have been impossible just a few years ago. But something was bothering Kate. She noticed that the ships were slowly changing their positions. They were drifting away from the human vessels, creating small gaps in the defensive formation. At first, she thought it was a sensor error. She ran the numbers 3 times. The movement was real. It was slow, almost impossible to notice unless you were looking for it, but it was happening. She reported her concerns to Commander. He listened carefully and then shook his head. They were their allies, he said. They had fought side by side for 3 years. They had bled together on a dozen battlefields. There was no reason to worry about small movements in the formation. Perhaps they were adjusting for some tactical reason that humans did not understand. Their technology was different after all. Kate wanted to argue, but she knew better than to push. Commander was a good leader and he trusted his allies. She returned to her station and kept watching the screens. The bad feeling in her stomach did not go away. On Earth, General Price sat in the command center of the United Defense Council. He was a large man with a thick beard and tired eyes. The war had aged him 20 years in just 3. His job was to protect the planet, and right now, most of his weapons were very far away. Nearly 70% of humanity's combat-capable ships were deployed at the front lines. They were preparing for a massive assault on the Hive World, a planet-sized nest where the enemy bred their soldiers by the millions. If they could destroy this world, the war would effectively be over. They would be crippled, and humanity would be safe. But this strategy left Earth vulnerable. Only a skeleton force remained to defend the home planet. General Price knew this was a calculated risk. If the attack succeeded, it would not matter that Earth was exposed. If it failed, well, they would have bigger problems than a weakened defense grid. Everything depended on trust. Trust in the plan, trust in the fleet, trust in the High Chancellor was the leader of the Confederacy. He was ancient by human standards, over 400 years old, though he looked like a man in his prime. His blue skin was smooth, and his silver eyes held secrets that no human could read. He sent a private message to Admiral Monroe requesting a meeting aboard his flagship. There were matters to discuss, he said, important matters about the upcoming assault. Admiral Monroe accepted without hesitation. She had met with many times before. He was formal and sometimes cold, but she believed he was honorable. She took a small shuttle from her command ship and flew toward the massive flagship. Her security team offered to accompany her, but she refused. This was a meeting between allies. There was no need for armed guards. Commander watched the Admiral's shuttle on his screen. It was a tiny dot of light moving toward the great shadow of the flagship. He felt proud of her. She had built this alliance from nothing. She had given humanity a chance to survive. Kate also watched the shuttle. Her hands were tight on her console. The ships had stopped moving now. They were in their new positions, spread out in a wide arc around the human fleet. The formation looked strange, almost like a net closing around prey. She wanted to say something, but she did not know what to say. Her concerns were based on nothing but numbers on a screen and a feeling in her gut. The Admiral's shuttle disappeared into the docking bay of the flagship. The communication channel stayed open for a few more seconds and then went silent. This was normal procedure. Meetings with the High Chancellor were always private. Across the combined fleet, human officers went about their duties. They checked weapons, monitored sensors, and prepared for the coming battle. They joked with each other about what they would do when the war was over. Some talked about going home to see their families. Others talked about exploring the galaxy in the new ships that had promised them. Nobody noticed that the weapons were slowly powering up. Nobody saw the targeting systems locking onto human ships. Nobody understood that everything they believed was about to be destroyed. Admiral Lisa Monroe would never return from her meeting. In just a few minutes, the galaxy would change forever, and humanity would learn a terrible lesson about the cost of trust. The stars continued to shine, cold and indifferent. The war was about to become something much worse than anyone had imagined. The first shot came from the flagship. A beam of pure white energy cut through space and struck the Admiral's shuttle just as it was leaving the docking bay. The small ship exploded in a flash of fire and metal. Admiral Lisa Monroe died instantly, never knowing that the alien she had trusted had just murdered her. Commander Daniel saw the explosion on his screen and his mind refused to believe it. There had to be a mistake. Perhaps there was an accident, a malfunction in the shuttle's engines. But then the second shot came, and the third, and suddenly the entire fleet was firing on the human ships. The Vigilance took a direct hit to its port side. Alarms screamed throughout the vessel. Crew members were thrown from their stations. Fire erupted in the lower decks. Commander grabbed the edge of his console and shouted orders that nobody could hear over the chaos. Lieutenant Kate's fingers flew across her screens. She was tracking the incoming fire, trying to find some pattern, some weakness they could exploit. But there was no pattern. They were simply destroying everything human. Their weapons cut through human shields like paper. Their targeting was precise and deadly. The communication channels filled with screaming. Human captains called for help, for explanations, for anything that made sense. Nobody answered. They did not speak. They just kept firing. Captain Turner commanded the destroyer Relentless. He was on the far edge of the formation when the attack began, which gave him a few extra seconds to react. He immediately understood what was happening. This was not an accident or a mistake. This was a coordinated ambush. The allies they had trusted for 3 years were killing them. He ordered his ship to turn and run. It was not brave, but it was smart. The Relentless was a small ship with good engines. If they could get enough distance, they could jump to safety. Behind him, larger ships were dying. The battleship Defiance, one of humanity's greatest warships, broke apart under concentrated fire. Its crew of 2,000 souls vanished in an instant. On the Vigilance, Commander was trying to organize a defense. His ship was damaged but still functioning. He ordered return fire, but their weapons barely scratched the shields. The technology gap that had made the such valuable allies now made them unstoppable enemies. Kate managed to get a distress signal out. She boosted the power to maximum and broadcast on every frequency. The message was simple: betrayal. They have betrayed us. Run. She did not know if anyone would receive it, but she had to try. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted less than 30 minutes. 400 human ships had been deployed for the assault on the Hive world. When the shooting stopped, only 37 remained. The rest were debris, scattered across thousands of kilometers of space. Commander survived because Kate made a difficult choice. She sealed the damaged sections of the ship, trapping dozens of crew members in compartments that were about to breach. Those people died so the ship could keep fighting long enough to escape. She would carry their faces in her memory forever. Captain Turner gathered what survivors he could. His small ship flew through fields of wreckage, picking up escape pods and rescue beacons. Some of the pods were empty. Some held people too injured to survive the journey home. But every life saved felt like a small victory against the overwhelming defeat. As the human survivors fled, the truth of the betrayal became clear. They had not acted alone. In the distance, ships appeared from behind a nearby moon. They had been waiting there, hidden. They had made a deal with the very enemy they were supposed to be fighting. The terms of the deal were simple. They would deliver humanity's military forces into a trap. In exchange, they would give them human territory and access to Earth's rich mineral deposits. Humans were considered expendable, a young species with too much potential. Better to destroy them now, before they became a real threat. On Earth, General Price received the fragmented distress signals. At first, he could not understand what he was hearing. The messages were broken and confused. Ships were dying. The Admiral was dead. They were attacking. He called for confirmation. More signals came in, each one more desperate than the last. Within an hour, he understood the full scope of the disaster. Humanity had just lost 80% of its fleet in a single day. The enemy was no longer just the. Now they faced the combined forces of two alien civilizations. General Price stood alone in the command center after everyone else had left. The screens showed the positions of the surviving ships, small dots of light crawling slowly back toward Earth. Behind them, the fleets were forming up. They would come for Earth soon. Everyone knew it. The general thought about surrender. It would be the logical choice. Humanity could not win this war. Their fleet was destroyed, their allies were enemies, and their planet was exposed. Any reasonable species would accept defeat and hope for mercy. But humans were not always reasonable. General Price had studied history. He knew what his ancestors had done when faced with impossible odds. They had fought, they had suffered, and somehow they had survived. He picked up the communication device and began making calls. Every factory on Earth would switch to weapons production. Every citizen who could fight would be trained. Every scientist would work on finding new ways to hurt the enemy. If the end wanted Earth, they would have to pay for it in blood. The surviving ships finally reached Earth's orbit 3 weeks later. They were battered, broken, and filled with wounded. Commander stepped off the Vigilance and looked at the planet he had sworn to protect. He felt shame for surviving when so many had died. He felt rage at the aliens who had murdered his friends. And he felt something else, something cold and hard growing in his chest. He felt the need for revenge. Kate stood beside him. Her eyes were empty and tired, but her voice was steady. She said they needed to find a way to hurt them, not just fight them, hurt them, make them regret what they had done. Commander nodded. The war was not over. It was just beginning. 6 months had passed since the betrayal. Earth was surrounded by enemies, but it had not fallen. General Price had turned the planet into a fortress. Orbital defense stations circled the globe like angry guardians. Planetary cannons could fire into space and hit targets thousands of kilometers away. Every mountain, every city, every patch of ground had become a weapon. The N had expected quick victory. They thought humans would surrender within weeks. Instead, they found themselves stuck in a bloody siege that cost them ships and soldiers every day. Human fighters attacked in small groups, hit enemy vessels, and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. Ground forces on occupied moons fought guerrilla wars that never seemed to end. Every human who could fight did fight. Farmers became soldiers, teachers became medics, engineers became weapons designers. The entire species had focused on one goal: survival. Dr. Amy worked in a secret underground facility beneath the Rocky Mountains. She was a cybersecurity specialist, one of the best in the world. Before the war, she had spent her time protecting banks and government systems from hackers. Now she was looking for a way to destroy an alien civilization. She had discovered something interesting. During the years of the Alliance, humans had been granted limited access to computer networks. This access was meant for coordination purposes, to help the two fleets work together more efficiently. They had used special codes to control what humans could see and do within their systems. But when the betrayal happened, they had made a mistake. They never bothered to revoke those access codes. Perhaps they assumed humanity would be destroyed before it mattered. Perhaps they simply forgot. Either way, Amy still had a door into their network. It was a small door, heavily restricted, but it was there. She spent months studying how the systems worked. Their technology was incredibly advanced, but it had a weakness. Everything was connected. Their ships, their weapons, their cities, their power grids were all linked to one central network. This made their civilization efficient and powerful. It also made them vulnerable. If someone could take control of that central network, they could take control of everything. Commander led the engineering team that worked with Doctor. He was a quiet man with steady hands and a brilliant mind. He understood machines better than he understood people. Together, they designed a program that they called Lockdown. Lockdown was a weapon unlike anything humans had ever built. It was not a bomb or a gun. It was a piece of code, millions of lines of instructions designed to infiltrate systems and seize control. Once activated, it would spread through their network like a virus, taking over every connected device. Ships would stop responding to their crews. Weapons would lock and refuse to fire. Power plants would shut down. Communications would go silent. They would become prisoners of their own technology. But there was a problem. The access codes Amy had were limited. She could not upload Lockdown directly from Earth. The program needed to be inserted through a communication relay station, a place where signals were boosted and distributed across their network. The closest such station was on a moon called 7, deep in enemy-controlled space. Captain Turner received his orders from General Price. His battered destroyer, the Relentless, would carry a strike team to 7. They would fight their way to the relay station, hold it long enough for Lockdown to be uploaded, and then escape if they could. Everyone knew this was probably a one-way mission. The chances of survival were very small, but the chance to hurt to truly make them pay for what they had done, was worth any price. Kate volunteered to lead the ground assault team. She had been promoted to captain after the betrayal, though she did not feel proud of it. Too many people had died for her to earn that rank. Now she wanted to use it for something that mattered. Sergeant Ben was chosen to lead the Marine squad that would accompany her. He was a big man with a face and hands that had seen too many fights. His soldiers were survivors of the betrayal, men and women who had lost friends and family to weapons. They did not need motivation. They needed only a target. The strike team prepared for weeks. They studied maps of the relay station. They practiced fighting in low gravity. They learned how to disable technology and how to kill soldiers. Every detail was important because there would be no second chances. Doctor gave Captain a small device, no bigger than a coin. This device contained the lockdown program. All had to do was connect it to the relay station's main computer. The program would do the rest. The night before the mission, Commander visited the Relentless. He found Captain sitting alone in the observation deck, looking at the stars. She did not turn when he entered, but she knew he was there. He said he wished he could go with her. She said someone had to stay behind to lead the fleet when the time came. They both knew what she meant. If the mission succeeded, there would be a war to fight. They would be weakened but not destroyed. Humanity would need leaders to finish what the strike team started. Asked if she was afraid, thought for a long moment before answering. She said she was not afraid of dying. She was afraid of failing. So many people had died already. So many more would die if lockdown did not work. The weight of all those lives pressed down on her shoulders. He told her she would not fail. He believed it because he had to believe it. There was no other option. The next morning, the Relentless departed Earth orbit. It moved slowly at first, hiding among asteroids and debris to avoid detection. Behind it, the remains of humanity's fleet waited. They were ready to attack the moment lockdown succeeded, if it succeeded. Captain stood on the bridge beside Captain Turner. Seven was waiting for them, a small gray moon circling a gas giant. Somewhere on its surface was a relay station that held the key to revenge. She touched the small device in her pocket. So much power in such a tiny thing. The fate of two civilizations rested in her hands. The ship flew on through the darkness. The reckoning was coming. The Relentless dropped out of jump space behind a small asteroid near Seven. Captain Turner immediately cut the engines and let the ship drift. Any electronic signal could alert the patrols that circled the moon. They had to be ghosts. Captain Kate gathered her team in the cargo bay. 30 Marines in heavy combat armor stood in rows, their faces hard and ready. Sergeant Ben checked his weapon one final time and nodded to her. They were prepared. The plan was simple because simple plans were harder to break. They would take 2 landing shuttles down to the surface, approach the relay station from the blind side, and fight their way inside. Doctor would monitor their progress from the Relentless and begin the upload, the moment connected the device to the main computer. They would have to hold the station for at least 15 minutes while the lockdown program spread through the network. 15 minutes did not sound like a long time. In combat, it was an eternity. The shuttles launched without lights, falling toward the moon like stones. The pilots used only minimal thrusters, relying on gravity to pull them down. It was dangerous flying, but it kept them invisible. They landed 3 kilometers from the relay station, hidden in a crater. Led her team across the gray surface. The moon had no atmosphere, so there was no sound. Only the crunch of boots on rock transmitted through their suits. They moved quickly but carefully, staying low to avoid being spotted by the sensor towers that dotted the landscape. The relay station was larger than expected. It rose from the surface like a metal mountain, covered with antenna arrays and communication dishes. Soldiers patrolled the perimeter, their blue skin visible through their transparent helmets, counted at least 50 guards outside. There would be more inside. She gave the signal. The attack began. The first wave of Marines hit the eastern gate with explosive charges. The blast tore through the defenders and created a gap in the perimeter. Led the second wave through the smoke and fire, her weapon cutting down every enemy in her path. They were surprised, but they recovered quickly. They were professional soldiers, well-trained and well-equipped. Their weapons were more powerful than human rifles. Their armor was harder to penetrate, but they had never fought humans who had nothing to lose. Sergeant's squad pushed through the main corridor, taking heavy fire from both sides. 2 of his soldiers fell in the first minute. 3 more went down before they reached the central chamber. Himself took a hit to his left arm, but he kept fighting, switching his weapon to his right hand without slowing down. Reached the main computer room with only 8 Marines still standing. The door was reinforced with alien metal that their explosives could not break. She ordered her team to hold position and looked for another way in. A ventilation shaft. It was small, too small for a person in full armor, stripped off her outer plates and squeezed inside. The shaft was dark and narrow. She could feel the walls pressing against her shoulders as she crawled forward. Behind her, she heard the sounds of combat. Her Marines were dying to give her time. She moved faster. The shaft opened into a storage room adjacent to the computer chamber, dropped through the ceiling and found herself face to face with a technician. Before he could raise an alarm, she killed him with a single shot. The noise alerted others. She had seconds. She ran to the main terminal and pulled out the small device that held the lockdown program. Her hands were shaking. The slot was different from what they had expected. For a terrible moment, she thought it would not fit. It fit. The device clicked into place, and lights began to flash across the console. On the Relentless, Doctor saw the connection activate. She began the upload immediately. Lines of code streamed across her screen, millions of commands pouring into the network. The program was designed to move slowly at first, hiding itself in the background processes of the system. Then it would strike all at once. Soldiers burst into the computer room, took cover behind a console, and fired back. She hit two of them before a beam struck her leg and sent her crashing to the floor. The pain was incredible, but she did not scream. She kept firing. Sergeant appeared in the doorway, his armor covered in blood that might have been his own. He threw a grenade that cleared the room and dragged behind a metal barrier. Only 5 Marines remained. They formed a defensive circle around the main terminal and prepared to die. 17 minutes. That was how long they held the room. 17 minutes of constant fighting, of watching friends fall, of refusing to give up. When the ammunition ran low, they used knives. When the knives broke, they used their hands. They could not understand why these humans would not surrender. They did not know that surrender was no longer a concept these soldiers recognized. Then the upload completed. Across the sector, every ship went dark at the same moment. Weapons powered down. Engines stopped. Navigation systems locked. Life support remained active because the lockdown program was designed to disable, not to kill, but everything else was gone. Although the power grid collapsed, cities that had never known darkness went black. Transportation networks froze. Communication channels went silent except for one message that repeated over and over in every language. The message said, "Humanity remembers. Humanity does not forgive." High Chancellor stood in his palace and watched his empire crumble around him. He screamed orders that no one could hear because the communication systems no longer worked. He demanded explanations that no one could give because no one understood what had happened. The most powerful civilization in the sector had been reduced to helplessness in less than an hour. They saw what was happening and made a quick decision. They fled. Their ships turned and ran back toward their hive worlds as fast as they could travel. They wanted no part of whatever humanity was about to do to the... On 7, Captain lay on the floor of the computer room, her wounded leg wrapped in emergency bandages. Only 3 Marines had survived, including Sergeant, but they had won. She activated her communication device and sent a message to Earth. 2 words that would change the galaxy. It worked. 1 year had passed since the lockdown program brought the Confederacy to its knees. Commander Daniel stood on the bridge of a massive warship that had once belonged to the enemy. It was a dreadnought, the largest and most powerful class of vessel they had ever built. Now it flew under a human flag and answered to a human crew. Its new name was Judgment. Captain Kate stood beside him. Her leg had healed, but she walked with a slight limp that the doctors said would never fully go away. She did not mind. The limp reminded her of what they had accomplished and what it had cost. 27 Marines had died on 7. She remembered every name. Sergeant Ben had recovered from his wounds and now commanded the ship's Marine contingent. His arm would never be as strong as it once was, but his spirit was unbroken. His soldiers, a mix of veterans and new recruits, trained constantly. They would be ready for whatever came next. Through the bridge windows, could see the hanging in space like a blue jewel. It was a beautiful planet, covered with oceans and forests and cities that had stood for thousands of years. Now those cities were occupied by human forces. The who had once looked down on humanity as primitive newcomers now lived under strict supervision. They were not enslaved. General Price had been very clear about that. Humanity would not become the monsters their enemies had been. They were allowed to live their lives, to work and raise families and practice their traditions. but every piece of technology they used was monitored by systems that answered to Earth. Any attempt to rebuild their military was detected and stopped within hours. They had freedom, but only the freedom that humans chose to give them. The lockdown program had evolved. Doctor had spent the past year improving and expanding it. Now it could monitor all activity across the former territory. It tracked communications, watched for weapons development, and reported any signs of resistance. The network that had once been their greatest strength was now their permanent prison. General Price addressed the United Earth Council from a chamber that had once belonged to High Chancellor. The walls were decorated with art, and the floor was made of polished alien stone. Himself sat in chains at the edge of the room, waiting to be transferred to a prison facility where he would spend the rest of his very long life. The general spoke about what had happened and what it meant. He said that they had believed humanity was weak because humans offered friendship. They had thought that kindness was the same as vulnerability. They had been wrong. He said that stabbing humanity in the back was the worst mistake they had ever made. If they had simply left Earth alone, if they had never made their secret deal with they would still be the dominant power in the sector. Instead, they had created an enemy that would not stop until justice was achieved. The council voted to maintain the occupation indefinitely. There would be no treaty, no negotiated peace, no return to the old ways. They had proven they could not be trusted. They would live under human authority until humanity decided otherwise. Doctor watched the vote from her laboratory. She had become one of the most important people in human civilization, though she did not seek recognition. The lockdown program was her creation, and she alone truly understood how it worked. She spent her days improving it, making it stronger and more secure. She never wanted to see humanity surprised again. Captain Turner had retired from active command. The Relentless was now a museum ship, preserved as a memorial to the Battle of Seven. Visitors came from across Earth to walk its corridors and learn about the mission that had saved humanity. Turner sometimes visited and told his story to young people who had not been born when the betrayal happened. They had sent envoys requesting peace. Their ambassadors were insect-like creatures with clicking voices and eyes that never blinked. They claimed they had been tricked by that they had not wanted to attack humanity. General Price did not believe them, but he accepted their surrender anyway. They would stay in their own territory. They would not expand. They would not threaten human interests. If they broke these terms, they would face the same fate as the other alien civilizations watched nervously as Earth consolidated its power. Humanity had gone from a young species struggling to survive to a major force in galactic politics. Some aliens sent friendly messages, hoping to build good relationships with the new power. Others kept their distance, worried about what humans might do next. The message was clear to everyone in the galaxy. Humanity could be a friend or an enemy. Those who chose friendship would find humans generous and loyal. Those who chose treachery would learn the same lesson they had learned. Captain walked to the observation deck of the Judgment and looked out at the stars. She thought about Admiral Monroe, who had died believing in an alliance that was already broken. She thought about the Marines who had given their lives on Seven. She thought about all the people who would never see what humanity had become. Commander found her there. He stood beside her in comfortable silence for a long moment before speaking. He said that new exploration missions were being planned. Humanity was ready to expand beyond the territory they had taken from them. There were hundreds of star systems waiting to be explored, thousands of planets that might support life. The galaxy was open to them now. Asked what he thought would happen next, it was a big question without an easy answer. Looked at the star map displayed on the nearby screen. It showed human territory, much larger than it had been a year ago. It showed the former worlds, now colored in Earth's blue. It showed the unknown regions beyond, places where no human had ever traveled. He said they would make sure this never happened again. Humanity would grow stronger. They would develop better technology, build more ships, train more soldiers. And if anyone ever tried to betray them the way they had, they would learn the same lesson. Nodded slowly, that answer worked for her. The Judgment turned toward the frontier. Its engines hummed with power that humans had once thought impossible to harness. Its crew went about their duties with quiet confidence. They were explorers and warriors, scientists and soldiers. They were human. Behind them, the grew smaller until it was just another point of light among billions. Ahead of them lay the unknown, full of dangers and opportunities that no one could predict. But humanity was no longer afraid of the unknown. They had faced the worst the galaxy could offer, and they had won. The stars were waiting, and humanity was just getting started.